Hey guys, it's Katie. Thanks for stopping by my channel. Today's video is going to be all about gardening. This is going to be your crash course to get you started with gardening. I'm also doing a crash course video on bread baking. There might be a few other topics that might come up that I'm going to do these crash courses in. These are meant to be kind of bare bones, just enough information to get you started. The most important thing is that you get started. If you want to learn these things, if you want to do these things, you have to just do them. So I'm giving you enough information to get you kind of headed in the right direction, and then you go do the thing. And then when you have questions, as things come up, as you need more clarification with things, be sure to leave lots of comments down in the comment section. But I need to kind of know what your questions are to know where to go. I don't want to overload you with a lot of information that you don't want. So leave comments, leave topic suggestions, anything you've ever tried in the past and had limited success, or if there's something that you want to add for other people that are coming to see this video. If you have like a really good tip that's really helped you in the garden, be sure to leave that in the comment section below. I'd love to hear your ideas as well. So I was really inspired to make this video and then subsequently my other kind of crash course videos that I'm working on because of a similar video that I saw on YouTube. She's my favorite YouTuber, and I'll link her video down below, and it's a similar thing. It's just like the basics, what you need to know to get started right away. And she's got awesome gardens, and I've been watching her garden videos for a long time, so be sure to check her out. Get people started. It doesn't need to be a global pandemic. I think every person should grow some part of their food no matter what your situation is. So the fact that it took a global pandemic to do it is kind of unfortunate, but if you're here and you want to garden and you have a new or a renewed excitement for having a garden, then I'm all for that. I'm all for supporting that for you. So anyway, if you're a longtime subscriber and you're happy to see me back posting on YouTube, at least go give her a view, consider subscribing, and I'll leave all her information down below. Okay, so like I said, I'm just going to run through these kind of bullet point tips that I've noticed make a big impact on the success in my garden. Okay, the first thing is not really a tip. A lot of these are just very like practical tips, but the first thing is just something I want you to think about, and it's like a mindset that you need to adopt, I think, or at least consider. And that is, this planet Earth, is teeming with life. There is an abundance of life on this planet. And if you think about like all of the different planets in the solar system, you know, how they're described by scientists as like frozen balls of rock and like flaming, boiling balls of boiling gas or burning that or whatever, like all of these different kinds of planets. But the thing that's special about Earth is that it supports life. It's like its defining characteristic about Earth is that it supports life. And not only does it support life, but like there's life everywhere that you go. You can't walk down the sidewalk without, you know, the tiniest crack in the sidewalk and having a plant grow up out of it. Anybody who's ever had a mouse in their house knows that you don't just have one mouse. If you have one mouse in your house, you have, you know, however many mice. They just kind of keep coming and keep coming. Any opportunity, any very slim chance for life to happen, it's going to happen, and most likely it's going to explode. So when you think about that, I mean, life is happening all around you and you're not even involved in it. And the same thing is for, you know, it's true for your garden. You're not growing a garden, your garden is growing itself. And a lot of times the most important thing you can do is get out of the way. So I notice this every time that I start seeds indoors. I have these lights, I have these timers, I have the cool bulb and the warm bulb, and I have the thing to hold the humidity. I even have like a thing that measures the humidity in the air, and I check the book and I figure out the exact day I'm supposed to plant my seeds. And those, you know, seedlings, they come up and they usually do pretty well. I put a lot of effort into them and I usually get pretty decent seedlings. And then I'll go out to plant them in my garden and I'll look over at my compost pile, and there's like just like seeds coming up from whatever stored-up produce that I just like threw the scraps outside, did nothing to them, and they're sprouting up, and a lot of times they look better and healthier and more vigorous than what I put all of my like love and energy into. So that's just like a small example. If you think of that on a larger scale, like your garden is growing itself. You just have to get out of the way. You're just there as like support of providing sort of support for the plants to be able to grow themselves. So the problem with growing a garden, the reason why people have more trouble with it than that, it sounds like it should just grow itself and everything's fine. The problem is there's other life that also wants to live. So you have your pests, like your bugs, your critters, your groundhogs. You have weeds that want to grow there in their place, and So growing things is not hard. Growing the right things sometimes is where the tricky part is. So I'd say if you're thinking about growing a garden, it's like 75% just letting the plant do its thing and 25% mitigating those problems. So that kind of takes me to a second point, and that is something that I heard a long time ago, and I love the way that it just encapsulates the whole idea is a farmer's shadow is the best fertilizer. And what that means is you need to be out in your garden every day. You need to be standing over your garden, working in your garden every day, even if it's 15 minutes. If you go out and you see a weed pop up, you pick up that weed and it's fine. If you don't go out for 3 or 4 days, that weed might turn into 5 or 6 weeds. And the same thing with pests. If you can catch pests early, you see something nibbling on your plant, you take it off. You address that problem, and you can sometimes nip that problem in the bud and correct the problem. Another thing, if it's something that's so severe that you can't correct the problem, at least you see it right away. You can take whatever affected plant out. If it's completely like gnawed down, like if a groundhog came and wiped out a whole like bed of lettuce, you can take that all out and start again. And it's not like you come back 3 or 4 days later and see it. You have to be out in your garden every single day. And I'm saying that as much to myself as I am to you. This time of year, March, April, May, it's so much fun to get out in the garden because, at least in my area, it rains all spring long, so I don't have to worry about watering. The temperature's nice, so it's enjoyable to be out there, and it's before the mosquitoes come out. When it comes to June, July, and August, that's when it's hot outside. You go outside for 10 minutes to look in the garden, you have to douse yourself with bug spray. You come back covered in bug spray, covered in sweat. Any dirt sticks to the sweat on your body. You end up filthy just being out in the garden for 10 or 15 minutes. So a lot of times that's when my garden starts kind of just languishing because I look at it through the window and I'm like, hi, how are you? But you have to be out every day. So just make a commitment. Just like anything that you want to have in your routine, make a plan for it. Just like any routine, you build it into your routine, but you have to be in your garden every day. So those were just kind of like general ideas to think about, kind of change your perspective on things. The rest of my tips are just kind of practical tips that you can apply in your garden, and they're just kind of bullet points. So I'm going to run through them. I have them a little bit categorized here, so it's going to be a little bit more organized. But the first thing is planning your garden. You need to know how, where, and when. Now, when you're planning your garden, you could be as meticulous and specific and exact as you want to. I don't think you need to be. I usually don't plan my garden that much in advance. I'm notorious for just like putting things here and putting things there and then working around things. And if you plan meticulously, you might have a tiny bit more efficiency. But at this point, I would think that planning too much ahead might just be an obstacle at this point. So I wouldn't worry too much about planning every little thing through the whole growing season. Right now, I would focus on your spring garden and looking forward to your summer garden, but mostly focusing on your spring garden and answer those questions. Where, when, and how. And so you need to know where you're going to have your garden, where in your yard. If you have a couple choices, you can just look at the pros and cons of the different areas. Your priority should be a sunny location with good soil, or soil that you can make good. And so that might be in the ground garden, that might be a raised bed, that might be containers. If you live in an apartment and you only have a balcony, then your decision is made for you. But you have to figure out where your garden is going to be. You have to figure out how you're going to do your garden. Are you going to do raised beds, in the ground, containers? Are you going to till it all up and add a bunch of compost to it? Are you going to till it up? Are you going to use synthetic fertilizers? Are you going to try to avoid synthetic fertilizers? Just kind of have these thoughts, kind of thought through. You don't have to make all of your absolute decisions now, and anything that you decide can be changed, but it's just a good idea to kind of think about these things from the beginning so that you can kind of know what to expect. The last thing is when. Knowing when certain things go in or when to start your garden will depend on your area. So it's helpful to know like your growing zone, it's helpful to know your last frost date, and a lot of that's just a couple quick Google searches to find what you need for your area. But that's kind of all you need to know as far as planning. Don't get too bogged down in it and then not start at all, or think that, oh, I can't do that because this says it's hard, or I can't do that. Like, don't worry about that. We'll worry about that when we get to that point, okay? All right, so the next section is going to be how you choose what you want to grow. And I just have some bullet points. These are just things to think about, and just things that have always steered me in the right direction if I kind of answer these questions when I'm deciding on what to grow. The number one is grow a plant that you can eat from the beginning. If you grow something like lettuce, or like think of alfalfa sprouts. You put sprouts in a jar, you put water on them, and within like 6 days you can eat them. You can eat that plant as soon as it germinates. And there's a lot of plants that you can eat like that. Any kind of green, lettuce, spinach, kale, Swiss chard, anything like that. Think of anything that's sold as sprouting seeds. So things like radishes, broccoli, different kinds of brassicas, or like cabbages and things like that. You can eat the seedling. You can eat the whole thing. You can eat the tops of radishes. You can eat the roots of radishes. And you can eat it from just when it's just germinated, kind of as sprouts. Let them grow a little bit and they can be like microgreens. Let them grow a little bit more and they can be like baby spinach or baby kale. Let them grow even more, they can be mature plants. So that's good for a couple reasons, because one is you get your food sooner. Like as soon as it germinates, if you want, you could take that out and have it to eat. Or when they're baby, like baby kale or baby spinach, you can eat them sooner, so you can get your homegrown vegetables sooner. And also, the longer a plant's out in the garden, the more chance it's going to be susceptible to pests, to a critter coming through, to it just languishing in the summer sun. So if you could get something sooner, or get it before something could happen to it, or if you see that something's happening to it, like maybe it's starting to get nibbled by bugs, or maybe you have to go out of town for 3 weeks all of a sudden, you can pull that up and eat that baby or greens and at least get something out of your garden. And then if you don't have to, or if everything's going fine, let it continue to mature and get even more and more and more. So there's a couple things. I talked about greens, so that's something. And then I talked about radishes and broccoli. Peas is another one. You can eat the shoots that come up, like the leaves and the stems that come up when a pea plant comes up. And pea plants will grow up. You can eat, cut them back and eat. They'll actually branch out and make even stronger plants, and then they'll flower and set the peas. And the peas, well, some of them you can eat the pod, so even if they're just little immature pods, you can eat the whole pod. And then, or you could let them grow and grow and grow until they form peas, and then you shell them. So you have to look and make sure your variety has like an edible pod, but that's another option, is you can eat all of those phases. Onions is another one. If they have just started growing, you can either start from seed, although they take quite a while from seed. Sometimes you can also get little bulbs. They just look like little mini onions you put in your garden, and they'll start shooting up right away. You can cut back those green onions and use them like you would scallions, or you can let the plant continue to grow and it will make a bulb. So even if you put an onion set in the garden, within like a week you will have something that you can use. Versus something like a tomato, you have to grow the plant. The plant has to grow big enough. The plant has to flower. These are all things that something can go wrong along any of these steps. The plant has to set fruit. The plant has to ripen the fruit, and you have to get it before a squirrel gets it. And so you might have 2 months of investment in, and if your plant is still thriving at the end of the 2 months, you'll probably get a huge abundance of tomatoes. But like I said, during that time, anything could happen, and that tomato plant will die, and you have gotten nothing out of it. You can't even, eat. You don't want to eat the tomato plant, but some plants you can eat at any stage. So greens, radishes, peas, onions, and sweet potatoes. I've never grown sweet potatoes, and I'm very curious to try them this year because I heard that you can eat the vines that grow on the top, and then you can eat the sweet potatoes that grow in the ground. Okay, another thing to think about when you're picking what to grow is think of plants that have a huge yield. And if you know anything about gardening, or if you've just been around people who garden, you kind of know what they are. Like zucchinis are notorious about people growing zucchinis, and they have so many that they're like sneaking them on people's porches in the middle of the night. So things like that. What I remember is things that are on vines, you're usually going to get a ton from. Because if a plant grows up, okay, let's just imagine that a bush grows. A bush can grow this big. If you have a good year, it might grow this big. But that's pretty much all the bigger that it's going to grow. And it might have a lot of flowers and make a lot of peppers or make a lot of tomatoes. Well, tomatoes a bad example because most tomatoes are actually vines. But if you think of a bean plant, whereas a vining plant, it starts to grow, it can make so many beans, like a bush bean. It grows so high, it makes so many beans, and that's great. But a vining plant will just keep vining. As long as you give it something to climb, as long as you're supporting the plant itself, that vine can grow and grow and grow. So the next thing is, if you are planting a lot of something, you want to plant something that can store well, or you know what to do with it. There's no sense in growing 1,000 tomatoes if they're just going to rot on your counter. Now, there is a point in which you can give away and be generous and share with your food pantry, but if you're planting your garden to take care of your family, you want to get the most use out of those items. Another thing is knowing how to store things. So keeping your onions, well, you have to cure your onions and keeping them, in a cool, dry, dark place, just like where you should be storing them if you're buying them from the grocery store. Same with potatoes. You want those to last as long as possible. If you're growing enough to go past the time in which it's harvest, then you can do that. If you don't want to do that, if you're not trying to make a ton for long-term storage, you just want fresh tomatoes because they're so delicious, then you're probably growing maybe 1 or 2 tomato plants, 1 or 2 pepper plants, 1 or 2 cucumber plants, and that's fine. That's for fresh eating. But if your goal of your garden is for putting up food or for long-term use during the off-season, you have to consider long storing crops and storing them properly, or how to put them up by canning, freezing, different things like that. So just when you're choosing your crops, just think, what am I going to do with this if I get a ton of this? Is it going to go to waste? I always plant and have a great success with lettuce, and it always kind of drives me crazy because I share it with everybody, but there's not really a way to store lettuce. You can't dehydrate it, you can't can it, you can't freeze it. So we just eat as much of it as we can. We enjoy it when it's in season, and then we wait until next spring when it happens again. Okay, the last thing is consider perennial plants. Putting in a garden every year, starting your seeds, starting your, if you start seeds ahead of time, doing all that, it's a lot of work. You got to do a lot of work just to get to the point where the plant is. If you have perennial plants, you go out in the springtime to clean the leaves back and see what's growing, and stuff's already coming up, and you didn't have to do any of that pre-work in the late winter or the early spring. So fruit trees, fruit bushes like blueberry bushes, strawberry plants, things that come back every year, asparagus, and then also things that self-seed. I have had parsley in my front garden for 7 or 8 years, and I haven't done anything to it. All I do is I let it come up whenever it's a 2-year plant, so it comes up from last year, and then it goes to seed, it throws its seed, those sprout up the next year, and then this year's will go to seed next year, and it's like this whole cycle. And all I do is I let it go to seed, so it's a little bit unsightly for a few weeks while the seed stalks are growing up, and then they dry, and then they look a little messy. But I just shake the end of the seeds stalks, let the seeds kind of naturally scatter everywhere, and then they come up again. And that's all I do, is I just let them do its own thing. I've had the similar luck with dill in my garden. I haven't purposely planted dill in my garden in maybe 3 or 4 years, and the last few years I've gotten kale that way too. This year I'm going to get a ton of marigolds, and I've done nothing. I'm actually going to have to pull them out as if they're weeds because there's so many. They're just taking care of themselves out there. So that's a lot less work on your part to do that if you can get your plants to take care of themselves. So annuals that can self-seed and sort of naturalize, or perennial plants that you can put in that will last and come back year after year. Another thing to consider is if you can't get your seeds to throw themselves and plant themselves, at least collect some of the seeds so you can have an abundance of seeds. And the seeds that you collect, for the most part, I feel like are always the better seeds, because those are the seeds that thrived in your garden to get to the point where they threw seeds. So those seeds are always going to do better. Plus it's free seeds. So, all right, so the last section is going to be the actual mechanics of planting your garden. You have to kind of figure, once you figure out how, where, and when, and how, and what you want to grow, you have to know how do you do it? Are you going to get seeds? Are you going to start your own seeds indoors and then transplant them out? Are you going to buy seedlings that have already been grown, or cuttings, or how are you going to do this? And I would say across the board, almost all of the time, it's better to get seeds rather than the plants. And I have a lot of reasons why I can talk about in a separate video. So there's just a handful of plants that I think do better from plants. Peppers are notoriously hard to start from seed. The other thing about the actual nitty-gritty of actually planting a seed is a tip that I learned a long time ago, and it's the size of the seed is how deep it needs to go. So those teeny tiny little seeds like lettuce seeds and carrot seeds especially are notorious for, you just kind of put them on the surface of the soil, and you might put a sprinkling of soil over top because they're itty bitty seeds and they just go right on the surface. When you get bigger seeds, they go deeper. So sometimes you grow like a broad bean, the seed is a dried bean, it's like this big, you got to put that deep, deep, deep. You can pre-germinate them, and basically you just put them in some paper towel get the paper towel wet, and it should start to grow, and you don't want to let it sit in the paper towel too long. You want, as soon as you see that it's like broken open and it's starting to grow, then you can put it in the ground. So that way you know that you have a higher chance of the seed actually emerging from the soil if you saw that it actually germinated. Okay, the last tip I have about actually growing, whether you're putting in plants or whether you're putting in seeds, a lot of times you'll see people, they put a plant in and they put water on it right away. So the reason why you water in your seeds is not because you're making them wet, it's because you're letting the water trickle down and bring dirt with it to fill in all of those air pockets so that your seed is surrounded by moist soil and not pockets of dry air. Okay, and the last thing I want to say, especially if you're starting from seed, you have to be vigilant when they first come up. The point in which they first come up until they're probably 2 or 3 inches is when they're most vulnerable. That's when squirrels come in and dig them up. That's when birds come and they'll pull them right out. That's when a snail can come up and just chomp it right off, and it just it's like chopping down a tree. A snail just comes up, can chomp it right in half. So you have to be out in your garden every day, like I said before, but those first days, one day of missing watering can make all of your seedlings just keel over. So make sure you're putting in the time, especially when they're very firstly germinated. If you're starting indoors, you have a little bit more control over that, but you want to make sure you're still checking on whether it's inside or outside every day. All right, I think that's everything I have. If you, like I said, if you have questions, please leave lots of comments down below, and we'll see what the next topic's gonna be, and we'll see you then. All right, thanks for watching. Bye.